Does my audio sound okay to you?
Yeah, it sounds great. How
Okay,
about you?
cool.
Okay.
Okay, three, two, one. All right, everyone. I'm excited to get another conversation going today. Today, I've got Mike Denning, CEO of SecureG. And Mike, you've had a lot of roles in senior product leadership, helping some of the biggest companies in the world kind of, stay relevant in technology and firms on the SaaS kind of side disrupt. Why don't you just give us a little bit about your background and talk about the things you're doing today? Oh, and I forgot to mention, you're also a principal over at Blu Ventures, and I think that seeing the world from that side of the equation might also be an interesting thing for us to get into. So, Mike, kind of give us a little bit about your tech and corporate innovation background, and how did you get into the role you've got today?
Great to talk to you today. Early career, it was kind of much more project management, program management, technical jobs inside, what at the time was called the Internet, as like the original single database hanging at ComNet and org domain names, and doing the DNS infrastructure for the Internet. This is back in the .com boom era, if you will, almost like the land grab. That kind of technical background and market background propelled me into a product role, where I've spent a significant portion of my early career helping everything from hosted email, when that was kind of a new thing, all the way through to managed security services providers, as well as internet infrastructure providers and software companies. So I spent some time at what was previously known as Computer Associates and their identity and access management business around security. I ran two businesses for Verizon that helped identify threats and support critical infrastructure inside DNS capabilities, as well as brand protection. And then my most recent kind of business experience was at prior to coming in kind of the investing and startup side of the world, was at Verizon. Ran the security business for Verizon, and finally, in a kind of more of an operator, I got into venture 2016 era, where I was at a COO of a startup. It was a D round startup, primarily led by NEA at the time, and then most recently, kind of the last 5 years, I've been focused on seed round, A round startups in cybersecurity, as Blu Ventures built out their cybersecurity practice. And I chaired a couple committees that did investments in early stage startups, and kind of got some initial promising ideas off the ground.
So, one of the things I think is interesting about, we're in the DC area here, and the cyber industry is very relevant here because of all the three, letter agencies. And it's also, a kind of industry that always seems to be expanding. And with the cat and mouse, there's so many ways to slice and dice security. In terms of, just where you kind of see this industry, especially sitting on, the early stage company side of security, can you help us frame what's the opportunity that you guys are looking at in security? Where does that kind of fit in?
It's a great question, because I've actually got it a lot in the last 12 months, because I helped raise a $25 million A round fund for Blu Ventures focusing on cyber. Mm-hmm. And so I talked to a lot of people over the last 12 months about, where's the cyber market? It's been so hot lately. Did I miss out? Are we too late for cyber? And I think there's two things that I talk about, really, and to keep that in context. Number one is, well, as a percentage of the total IT spend, it's still relatively small, right? And that, estimates between 10 to 13%, continuing to grow. And that, back when we started these conversations, from a investing perspective, mm-hmm. It was single digits, right? But it's now crested double digits of total IT spend holistically. So there's some definitely opportunities for growth. But I think the analogy I use for people that are not maybe as familiar with cyber and think about well, is it too late? Is cyber kind of hit their peak? Is it totally played out? I look at it this is that it's a cybersecurity and security in general is still a very fractured market that hasn't really rolled up. And there's a specific reason, I think, for that personally. And I tell this analogy between the difference between two sports, golf and baseball. So to me, traditional IT and venture investing is a lot like golf, which is if we spent some time on the driving range and you practice a little bit, the golf you could get good enough at. Golf, your target is stationary. It's a golf ball and it doesn't move. And it's a very hard game and a very frustrating game for people to play it. But at the same time, golf is that you get your swing better and you consistently advance it down the fairway, and hopefully you get a par. You're likely to get a bogey or something higher.
Yeah.
The difference in cybersecurity is more like baseball in that if you've ever played baseball or watched baseball, baseball has you have an actual adversary in the form of a pitcher. And that if you're trying to hit a ball, the reason why people go to the Hall of Fame for being successful 3 out of every 10 times is it's hard. There's an adversary, and that adversary is trying to throw a cut fastball, a changeup, a curveball, a four-seam fastball. You don't know what's coming. You don't know where it's coming, and it's despite the fact you might be among the best in the world at it, you're only successful 3 times out of 10. So cybersecurity feels a little like that in that you actually have an adversary that's sophisticated, agile, constantly using various techniques, and then using their own human experience against people to get access to the credentials and steal data.
Yeah, when I think about spending a lot of time around emerging technology and, looking at some of the incubators that have been around this area where there's some basic science innovations that create a cybersecurity capability, but they're not really products. Turning that basic science innovation to a product, is a very difficult thing. And just more broadly, like the game in disruptive technologies is they get commodified very quickly. So a thing that creates an advantage for you will also be quickly understood potentially by a bunch of other companies that also want to copy it. It is a hard place to stay, on the ball. So just in terms of SecureG, so just folks understand, then what is your kind of area of focus with SecureG?
Yeah, so I'll kind of tie in kind of your previous comment and a little bit about SecureG. So SecureG is a technology that really takes across a couple of macro trends in the marketplace, and that is that the expansion and availability of high-speed, low-latency mobile communication. 5G is kind of the buzzword for it, but the reality is that autonomous vehicles, autonomous things, the Internet of Things, but specifically what we're focused on is the industrial Internet of Things. And you've seen a lot of high-profile attacks on the industrial Internet, and it really is a vulnerability, mostly because these are systems that are very old, oftentimes running that. They are almost never monitored. They are almost never updated. And so there's a criticality to making sure you get things right, right? And so the focus of SecureG is to use a technology that's a standards-based technology that most organizations know today, called public key infrastructure, that was innovated by Verizon back in the mid-90s. And it was used for authenticating and encrypting traffic to websites and people, and pivot that technology to create the next generation of PKI that will really focus on machine-to-machine communication and built at cloud scale and cloud speed. So from a SecureG perspective, what I found very interesting and why I kind of came out of venture and into one of the startups that was a part of the SecureG portfolio was this is something that really is critical in the internet infrastructure, and it had the backing of two key players in this space. One was the U.S. public sector in the form of MITRE, is one of the key backers, and the other was an organization called CTIA. which is the industry consortium around mobile communication operators. So think about not only T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon, but also Nokia, Ericsson, Qualcomm, Samsung, Apple are all key members of CTIA that kind of view kind of what's happening to enable the internet infrastructure needed to enable kind of the next generation of communication and the security capabilities that you'll need to have for 5G, 6G, and beyond.
This is interesting because I think, when you're trying to position a new business as a founder, there's all these things you're looking at. But to me, there's kind of an implicit advantage for folks that have lived through the advent of the internet into the advent of mobile. And I generally frame it to people this way, that like, if you're taking a 5-year view on is the market, like when is the right time to launch an Uber? I'm sure there was a million apps that tried to get a cab before Uber, right? In times where it just couldn't work out. Or I think about people talk about Netflix pre-broadband, where you had to send the DVDs versus bandwidth. So the first thing I look at is like, well, you generally could call it Moore's law, but essentially there's a dial-up phase of market making and the broadband phase. And until you hit this kind of inflection point where the network, the cost of running big loads on a network is essentially immaterial, right? That's one dimension. The cost of the hardware to be able to make the device production in the hands of every consumer accessible to, B2B market. And the third one is just the cost to then produce the software, where in my opinion, like anytime I'm thinking about a business that sits on this internet economy, I'm thinking about like, what's the role of bandwidth and then the need for kind of, the available pipes, what's the role of the proprietary versus commodity hardware, and is there existing like open source frameworks or software layer where I only want to pay to write the code that generates the money as opposed to build the whole thing, from scratch. And in kind of my career, that has served me very well to say, okay, you can start a company in 2010 for mobile, but it's not really, it better be able to survive until 2015, because that's when the mobile becomes a marketplace because of 4G, LTE, those kind of things. So when I didn't even think we'd be kind of hitting this corner of conversation, but when I think about, I've been very intentional to think about from 2010 to 2015, that's kind of a phase. From 2015 kind of to 2020 is this what I think people call digital transformation, is that now the marketplace exists. Now you have to have a portfolio of tech top to bottom. And now to your point, you have to secure that. When I think about, say, 2020 to 2030, putting aside pandemic stuff, which I think maybe we should see if there's an impact to your business. But I think there's going to be more software in the future, not less. There's going to be the same stack that enabled this mobile explosion will now hit B2B with 5G and IoT. And I think it's geometrically, and again, I'm no kind of futurist here, but I think it's geometrically more value creation opportunities than just getting phones in the hands of consumers. Like the fact that your doorbell could recognize you and then unlock the doors as opposed to, or not recognize it. You know what I mean? Like the level of these things that is just a platform for market dynamic. And, to try to kind of bring that maybe into the conversation around when you look at the cyber industry, or when you look at industries that fit the core underlying dynamics that your play with your startup, is trying to look at, are there industry dynamics like that you guys are looking at?
Let me take it specifically to SecureG right now. And kind of as I thought about the opportunity and joining as CEO, and some of the things is like, one of the things I look to is what you're like, take a wider aperture. I think it's really helpful to do that wider aperture that you're talking about and say, what are the macro trends inside the market? These are not kind of flash in the pan, someone's going to want to do this differently and it's an inconvenience. This is fundamentally, how do we think we're going to communicate, live, work, move in the future, right? So, and so one of the things that I think you can see coming clearly is, how we connect, right? How we connect, and I think that's a major macro trend. So we have 4G LTE, and then we have 5G, and they're already working on the 6G standards, and now the 5G's gone into the implementation. Well, I start to think about what are the use cases that could potentially be available once you have ultra reliability, low latency communications, higher throughput, all of these things that couldn't be done are now able to be done in near real time, right? So just one thing that I talk about a lot when I talk to folks about my company is like, think about the artificiality of today, of how much you care about how you're connected and your phone, your handheld device is connected to the internet. Today, you look at there and am I on Wi-Fi? Am I on LTE? Am I on 5G? Am I on like a peer hotspot? Like, and all of these, you go through all these steps, manual processes. Like, why? It doesn't make any sense. What if it was more ubiquitous and someone owned your access to it, but ultimately that access was, so ubiquitous through various connection technologies, and because you trusted a device to get on a system, it didn't really matter how you connected. I think that's really, when we start thinking about, okay, that makes a lot of sense. This is just artificial of me. I want to be on Wi-Fi to download this movie. That's just one tiny little example. You're going to have when autonomous vehicles, whether they're vehicles you're riding in or those that are delivering your packages or those that are securing perimeters, they're all going to have to be, authenticated and secured and authorized onto this quote unquote network. And how that kind of private networks and public networks, I think you're going to see lines being blurred. So back to your original question, original point of like these macro trends, I think as a company around innovation, or as a company looking to do innovation, you should start with those macro trends and then map it into where you start to feel your company's core competency is.
I'm always amazed that I've got all these smart devices and they always will defer to the Wi-Fi. But if the Wi-Fi isn't connected to the internet, I'm like, can't you be smart enough to know that there's actually no signal, like you're connecting just to the hub and not getting all the way home? So, being on the startup side, the risk, in my experience, is being right, but being 10 years too early, right? We have all these advantages, we're in on the rail in an industry, we see where this advantage is, but we're only thinking about it from the point of like what's technically possible, as opposed to what's maybe economically feasible or what people are mature enough to buy. And you had mentioned in a previous kind of question here around talking to CISOs. And so when I think about like the role of CISO being a relatively new role, right? And I think about some of these changing roles on the other side that you've seen when you're inside the building at some of these companies, and how the more that you establish what is the role and responsibility of a CISO, what does that mean to a CIO? What does it mean to a CTO? You know what I mean? How are these emergent roles defining or being not necessarily well understood? And I think it might be good to just get your take. A lot of the conversations I've been talking about are firms that are creating a chief digital officer role to kind of lead change. But what happens when you get there? Do you need that role anymore? Or is this a new org structure department? In the sense of security, where there is so much of a cat and mouse game, there's an overwhelming set of choices of software that you need to put together to run a portfolio end to end of security. Just for the benefit of folks that may be thinking about where does the line end between my CIO and my CISO? What patterns do you think people doing right? Or if you're in the CISO role, how are you thinking about classes of technology? Do you have any thoughts there?
There's a lot to unpack with that question, I think. Let me start with kind of the role of the CISO. And I think it's definitely evolving. And I think what a lot of startups in the past 5 years have focused on, speeds and feeds, or I got a dashboard. And if you just buy my magic elixir dashboard, all your problems are going to go away. I think kind of forward-leaning CISOs take a little more of a proactive approach. and answer some of the things around identity management to say who has access to what and what's good practice around not leaving credentials around to expose ourselves to unnecessary risk, because that's a very, there's some good research out there done by Verizon called the data breach investigation report, completely free, don't even need to put in your email, and it really goes into how are people getting breached today, right? And so I think a good CISO is really starting with, knowing your resources, knowing your attack surface, knowing your environment, knowing your people, processes, and compute environment to start with. The second thing I would say is that we're seeing more and more kind of forward-leaning, again, CISOs look at the impact on users. And I think categorizing those users in different categories and understanding internal users, thinking of employees and contractors, and external users, thinking customers and partners. And what's their experience like? And so too often, what CISOs think up, their job is to put in walls and protect things, right? And I think that needs to be balanced with what's the user's experience of your security framework and how you're trying to protect your environment. Because yes, it's absolutely critical, and there are more and more regulations and financial penalties and reputational damage done in the event that there's a breach. But what, the most, I always say the most secure highway is the one that nobody drives on, right? And
yeah,
so
right.
You want to secure yourself out of business. And so enable, monitor, and authenticate all of these transactions. And that's where there's this concept right now really big in security called zero trust. And which in the Army, we had a saying, it was, in God we trust, all others must sign, which effectively grants users temporary access to a specific resource. And so this is zero trust is going to be a journey. But I do think it starts with just knowing your digital footprint and your digital environment, and then knowing your employees and contractors, and then making sure you do good governance. If an employee leaves, you turn off their access. If a contractor or a contract ends, you turn off their access, and you do a regular touch points around that kind of compliance. So so many of these breaches are stale legacy default passwords, or compromised privileged users that shared passwords and things like that. And I think more proactivity on understanding your environment, and then enabling technologies that allow people to do their job, but then kind of monitor what's going on and look for that anomalous activity, is where I think the best companies are going with how they think about their security architecture.
Yeah, and to me, my background being more on the UX side, like people always talk about the ubiquitous user experience. The best one is you don't even recognize it because it's just such a seamless, effortless thing. And when I think about, working with organizations where there's a lot of the say no people, so it's really hard for certain teams to just get access to systems, and working through, virtual kind of boxes and things that, if you're thinking through how can we enable the security we need to, but not slow down the company's ability to stay competitive in the market, there can be a real tension, in that conversation. There was something else that you were touching on around, this kind of modernization, I guess, journey. It's really, something that opens my eyes all the time to see how much legacy technology is out there. And specifically when you start getting into highly regulated industries, like finance or healthcare, where I remember, working at a financial regulator on a systems modernization where they were still running, Windows NT, Windows 2000 operating system in 2005 and 6 because they had all the security patches in place, right? And so the idea of like changing slowly enables security was a mindset, 10 years ago, as opposed to, now all that legacy technology that could have end of life is you can start the modernization journey from the perspective of an audit of risk. And there was a framework that was introduced to the folks on the product team, which was, I thought, very helpful from risk management. But I think the levers that you're talking about, the first was, how much risk can we alleviate with just core new technology, just a straight technology play? And there's a certain amount, but then there's a lot around operations. So when I think about things like Sarbanes-Oxley, like who gets access to what, when, but that's more of an operations play that we're enforcing, right, through other tools. Then it's legal, like, okay, we're flowing risk to our vendors, to other people, right, we'll pay the money, they'll own the risk of maintaining the security or what have you. And then the last layer was insurance, right? And so we can't anticipate everything. So how do we hedge ourselves? And I think having a basic framework to expand that conversation from a yes or no, the CISO, is like, very, very valuable. And so maybe let's kind of shift over then. A lot of execs are trying to build teams that are addressing either on the attack or the defend side of this. When I talk to a lot of folks doing startups, especially, in a tech-centric space like cyber, where sometimes there's core IP needs to be part of the play, and other times it's more about a convenience of a business workflow. It's not a core IP. Where would you guys put, like, for you guys, is your market advantage creating patentable IP, having some proprietary standard technology, something, or are you looking at kind of a broader end-to-end business workflow and you're going to add convenience? Where do you guys sit, and then how does that change how you structure your team?
So that's a great question, and it's one that I kind of think about a lot. But just we know where we are in this space, and in particular, we are taking advantage of standards-based technology that's been around for a long time, and pulling it into and become kind of the next generation, right? And in particular, the next generation use cases need to be cloud-centric. They need to be high speed, low latency, near real time communications that takes advantage of some of these macro trends for automation, autonomous vehicles, 5G connectivity that enable some of these use cases. So we working on 4 key patents right now as a company. And a lot of that is, how do you maintain this great standards that's proven the test of time, but add and the good news is the standard was well written, and it envisioned extensions beyond this current certificate, right? To say, well, what if you added these fields, and what if you got a community to agree on those additional fields? You can do things like much more dynamic routing, or so where you can make decision-based routing decisions based on where you're trying to go, what you're trying to do, who you're trying to communicate with. So for my specific company and where we're working, it's very much a standards-based approach that takes advantage of the expandability of that standard and creating some patents around that, and then creating what we're doing is very much an evangelist sale right now. Okay. And so we're getting market-moving players and getting those long-term infrastructure level changes that they'll need to make to create a center of gravity in the industry that then becomes a trust framework that a lot of other innovation can happen on top of. Because it's kind of the analogy I use sometimes around inside security. We talk a lot about this clean pipe, right? And so the reason why sometimes people bristle at purchasing security is that it's kind of sold to them like, well, you need this security because your water is dirty. It's like, who would buy dirty water? I don't even want dirty water. Give me the clean water. It's almost built into it. So I see a lot of the evolution of security being more, instead of, I got a dashboard, it's a magic elixir by my dashboard to view and react. And it's like, it's a game of whack-a-mole. If you ever been to the carnival, it's a game of whack-a-mole that's where the playing field just keeps getting bigger and wider, the larger your digital footprint is, right? Because you got to do it. You got to transform your business into a digital business. You got to expand the new use cases that your business wants to enable. You got to expand this macro trend around mobility and a seamless user experience between the browser and the remote device. It's table stakes now from a digital experience, but security needs to adapt specifically to enable those advanced use cases, to make sure that this game of whack-a-mole and the exposure that you get with this kind of expanding digital footprint doesn't become completely unmanageable.
So, if I put my like product owner hat on, and it might be interesting to just get your kind of take on that role, because a lot of folks are just still struggling with what's a project manager, what's really a product owner, how do I know how to hire these people, set these roles up for success? But the question is, like, when I think about going to market as like with an ecosystem of partners, right? It is a very interesting, different approach than just saying, hey, we're the standalone service. You know what I mean? Here's the competitive peer group. This is more like we're part of an integrated supply chain. And the value is that we're a key piece of this network. And that network of potential channel partners or, folks that you sit on top of in the value chain is an addressable market. Right, that's quantifiable. So I look at companies that just add extensions to AWS or Azure, but their market is that market that they sit on top of, and really kind of factoring that into where you add value, where you kind of integrate with your partners. How does that type of ecosystem approach affect how you guys build your product roadmap? You know what I mean? Where you have to coordinate with others, or to your point, make more public standards so you don't have to do all of this company to company coordination.
Let me start with the product owner question, then I'll come into the second part of your question. So for us, finding, because we live in this space and it is a pretty well-established technology and public key infrastructure, I think from the evolution of the product owner in the time from when we didn't have that term back when I was doing product management, but essentially it was somebody that could do the translation between what the customers are saying and what the customers need. And so the analogy is like
the Office Space guy. I'm a that guy.
Yeah, of course.
That's it. Yeah.
It's hard not to go there, isn't it?
Yeah.
So absolutely, right? It's like having that translator, someone that is technical enough to communicate requirements to software developers, but also market facing enough that customers will share, aspirational roadmap ideas of what they're trying to do. But not only that, really listen for not only what they're saying, but what their pain points are and what their problems are. And don't necessarily, like the analogy I use usually is the minivan, right? No one asked for the minivan, right? If you just listened to the customer, did exactly what the customer said, we'd all be driving massive station wagons with lots of cup holders. And I don't know if you ever rode in the backseat.
Oh, I did. I rode in the ones that face backwards, and then the ones that like, look at each other. That was the Crown. The Chevy Impala was just shotgunning out rear gunner, and then the Crown Vic, whatever that was, Country Squire, I think is what it was the you and your brother staring at each other's faces.
Now we're totally dating ourselves, right?
The way back. We called it the way back, too.
Yes, we did too.
Not the third row. That was the way back.
I want to sit in the way back. We'd fight over who got to sit in the way back, right? So, so when you think about what a product owner today does, I use that to explain when I'm hiring or recruiting a product owner. And when you're interviewing that product owner, are they the type of person that can speak business and speak requirements and speak customer, but still translate that into, okay, then where do we do from that? It's a very strategic, and I would venture to say the product owner / product manager is among the most strategic positions within the company. And you have to be kind of in the market, seeing who has not only the experience, but you also have to find people that have that potential. The potential that you see, which they have the technical real world experience inside a particular technology area, but they have the soft skills and frankly, the analytical skills to find the requirements that they're not asking for, the requirements that they're not just going to come out and say, please build me this exact product because this exactly solves all of my needs. You have to listen for those pain points and think about it as how could technology think and frame this problem differently? And so the product owner, I think, is that critical role that translates what the market's saying, what the market actually wants, and what you can deliver as a company. And those three things are not always in alignment. And so.
Yeah, no, and like I think in a B2B context, it brings up that, well, there's a whole world of just like the love and hate of selling to telcos. Like, oh, it cures cancer, but it doesn't cure AIDS. You know, it's like you could have a huge market, but sometimes the requirements you could never fully satisfy. And in B2B, I remember some of the best advice or just kind of insight. Well, I was talking to someone, I think it was who worked at Mobile Iron, and he said, you know, if I build more than a 60% solution, I'm hemming in our ability to sell across industry. And I remember because I was coming from startups, you know, and thinking we have to build this like the most amazing, perfect thing. And then you realize, but that may mean something different in a B2B context for oil and gas than healthcare. And so if you're building a platform play, it's like, what is the 60% we own? What do we put out to the community market? How do we architect our software to be able to drop in and drop out components? And then to your point, maintain security. Like it takes the product issue and it almost makes it like, well, it's like I'm building a platform for my product, but also for other people's products to get the user fully customizable control. But then I have to build a professional services ecosystem. And it's something that actually, I was talking to someone at like Mandiant or FireEye, and they were saying that, you know, in a lot of startup businesses, they try to limit the amount of professional services to less than 15% of revenue because they don't want to be seen as a services firm. But in cyber, there were some interesting anti-patterns where, like, if you have a healthy incident response, that is huge product intelligence if you manage it correctly. Do you have, is it relevant to what you guys are trying to do, this kind of role of phenomenal customer? Where is the role of professional services to feed customer intel, or these kind of, are you building alpha customer groups? What are you guys doing to get that off the ground?
It's interesting, having been on the venture side for as long as I did. It's like I would say, and I've given this advice to startups before, and I'm thinking about it myself now in my company, is that the subject matter expert, the person that really knows the technology and the future vision of your technology, is absolutely critical, and kind of evangelizing where you're going with your vision. And what I would say is, it's not the recurring revenue and professional services revenue are not apples to apples. But if you're a startup and you're pitching venture capital, don't try to hide professional services as recurring revenue. It is a means to an end. You said it great. It's customer intelligence. It's market intelligence. It's threat intelligence. It's all of these things that are so valuable as you're building your startup to say, hey, they're saying, I mean, in there, I'm doing, you know, the professional services around implementing our technology. But they're really complaining about this. And it seems like if we just added a couple capabilities here, our technology could solve this problem that they're talking about and holding meetings on and fighting about all the time. I think that it is so valuable. And just be frank. My advice to startups is just call it out and don't say it's something it's not. Don't say, oh, my revenue is bigger than it is because of this. It's recurring services. No, it's not, right? And so it's lower margin, it's less repeatable, it's less scalable, it's all of those things, but it doesn't mean it's not valuable at all. I think it is valuable. I think people need to not, I think smart venture companies are looking at it as they're insightful, and they're doing all the things they need to do to get that greater customer intimacy and get closer to really building that scalable product, because they're getting so much good intel. And oh, by the way, they're doing it in a paid engagement that defers some of the expense what they otherwise would be taken out of a venture funded my checkbook.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and also, when I've been on the kind of diligence side for VCs, looking at companies that have a heavy, professional services customization, there's one thing we always kind of tell the teams to keep an eye out for, is what I call the merge to master problem, which is you're getting paid by your professional service engagements to innovate a feature that isn't in your product roadmap, but it's not getting merged into master. So 5 years of customizing software goes out to clients, but you didn't structure the deals in a way where you're really realizing, if we had that as part of our components or our whatever, we could be licensing. And then these big implementations, you realize these are totally separate code bases now. It'll be impossible to merge that together 5 years down the road. And it's a trap that I think a lot of product companies, especially in the early stage, where you're just like, all money is money and say yes to everything, which can be great advice, but you can get stuck in painting yourself in three corners,
Totally agree.
So let's talk about the Blu Ventures side. So that is kind of an interesting other, hat to wear, and focusing on, I'm assuming, or maybe you can just kind of talk us through, my limited experience dealing with investment bank folks. It was very insightful in understanding investment bankers are I don't want to disparage investment bankers here, but they're like, there's a way, it's like, if you just are a Salesforce partner, that's a great, we know what the valuation for those firms is. It's like, then there's companies that just want to buy a thing. And so you can get a really interesting sense of a capability or a market having great relationship with investment bankers, because they'll tell you, here's what the multiples are in capital raise, here's what they are in exit. This is where the market sees value in different specific capabilities, or, commercial platform ecosystems. And when I talk to PE firms, I really try to understand, like, what is your thesis on the market? And are we trying to invest and build something ahead of the market? Are we trying to build something in the market's at its top? Are you aggregating the kind of revenue stale companies for a cleaner operation? Some kind of, it's a good point to consolidate. And so how do you guys, when you're approaching it from the venture side, like how do you define the thesis? What kind of things are you looking at to then, to basically drive the decisions for the firm?
Let me start with the general, and then I'll go to a specific. And that's something that our managing partner says all the time. Is like, venture investing is pattern recognition, right? Like, you're looking at your own experience, your own operator experience, which Blu Ventures has all former operators. It's one of the criteria for becoming a Blu partner. But it's pattern recognition. And so you start to see these trends. And as you spend time in the market, like, what are the companies that are going to make it? And make it, meaning for us, it's go from the A to the B to the C, right? And so we're early in that life cycle. And so we are looking for those kernels of opportunity that we see. Oh, that reminds me of, and the collective nature of the partnership then can get together and discuss it. And different people have different vertical expertise. But we frame it and have a blog post on this on our website in the five T's, right? Okay. And I'll come to the most important T last, right? The terms, what are the terms of the raise? Technology, how solid, how mature, how scalable is the technology? Traction, meaning what kind of, do they have any customers that we can talk to? What kind of early traction do they have? And what are those, what's that look like? The TAM, or the total addressable market, like, how big is this? Is this a use case of 15 companies and $1 billion, or 5,000 companies at an ASP of $20,000? Like, how big is the TAM? And realistically, the SAM, what can they address? But TAM starts with a T. But then the last one I think is the most important one, especially earlier in stage, and that's team. And that, have they assembled the right team with the right level of expertise and the right level of kind of passion for this problem? I was listening to another venture capital investor that I really respect a couple of weeks ago, and he was describing how he's really put an increased focus on the passion, the personality of the founder or the CEO, because this really resonated with me when he said it, which is that's so important because you're going to be the chief recruiter for the talent, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to look at you and say, and this is something I would always do intuitively, but he said it in a lot better way. And that is that, do I want to work for that person, right? Just put myself, take 10, 15, 20 years, whatever that would I, as an individual, want to work for that person? Mm-hmm. And I think that is critical, because that's a lot of what the CEO founder is doing, is they're creating an environment for high potential, high energy people to work together. Because money is money, right? It has a value. It can buy certain things, but that experience and the ability to work with high performing individuals that are subject matter experts in their field is just a contagious energy that is something that, when you experience it firsthand, you'll chase that for the rest of your career, to be part of that high energy, high performing team. And that's not to say they're not going to be setbacks or they're not going to be downs, but the excitement and the energy and the daily, want to get out of bed, and you get out of bed thinking about what you're working your project because you want to, not because you have to. It's just something that you can't really put a price on. Yeah.
And, it reminds me of something a professor said in business school, talking about the Marine Corps poster, and the advertising for the Marine Corps, saying that they want to create such an archetype that you either want to be that or you don't. And they want both responses, because they don't want to have to try to onboard people that really don't feel aligned.
They qualify them out, right?
Yeah. And I think there's something implicit in that, obviously, just, the reality of being an early stage company that, and being someone myself who had spent a lot of my career at early stage companies, I never thought about it. I was saying this to a buddy of mine last night. I was like, I never really thought about it like I was making a conscious choice. And then at some point in my career, someone said to me, you're like a really high risk person. You've chosen. I'm thinking to myself, I never really, I must have been missing some gene in my brain where I'm like, is this a job that this whole company could go sideways in 6 months? We weren't looking at that piece of it. To your point, it was like, this is the next big thing, and I need to be part of this thing. And it's also, as people kind of look, I guess, around at the talk of recession and other things, and it's also been my experience, some curious years, Mike, where having lived through the dot-com crash and, the impact of 9/11 and the financial crisis, and now whatever this, these other kind of things may be, I've always said to folks, I've seen a lot of people leave technology in early stage companies when those constrictions happen, but I've also seen massive talent that stays in the game aggregate around the things worth doing, right? That the tide goes out, and the projects that have, sustainability and scale, but now they can be magnets for talent. And the S curve of the next big thing, it could be the perfect time in your career to jump forward 10 years. And I'm curious, again, I don't know how, you kind of see where things are, but in terms of being that CEO, and trying to build the talent on your team, there's some recipes we've seen at Modus around the work, the culture comes from the work itself. And are we as a firm active, visible, and relevant in our industry so that the people that want to do this work are finding us? What kind of things are you guys seeing, or, what is your experience with building that team?
When I think about building the team, and because I've been doing this in earnest for the last 5 months as the CEO, I think it's you have to build kind of a relationship. It's not a one interview and you're done. It's a series of interviews. It's a series of conversations. And what I tell folks inside the interview is, look, you're sitting here, we've already figured out that you have the right skill set. We're just trying to figure out if you're going to be happy here, and we're going to be happy in this environment. So I want you to really think about that. And I don't want you to answer me right now. I want you to be thoughtful, and I want you to come back to me with how you think you are going to fit in this culture. And so, and I say, and here's the good side, and here's the bad side, and here's when you're going to feel great, and here's when you're going to feel not so great. And so, like a really honest conversation, I think people, to your point back in the Marine Corps example, self-select, right? It's like, yeah, I don't want to do that, and that's okay, right? And I think that I just give candidates and people coming to work for my company time to make a thoughtful decision rather than, too often. And you said this earlier, you get caught up in the moment of, I want a job because there's a job and I interviewed for it and now I want it. And that's my personality. It's like, I want it and I fall in love and bang, we're off to the races, right? Like, but wait, do I really want this job? I wanted to get an offer, right? Right. But do I want the job? Is what I am going to be doing exciting to me on a daily basis? And can I be successful? Can I be happy? Can I be working with a group of people that I feel like culturally are aligned with what they want to do, with, 50% of their waking hours in the day, right? It's not a small investment. And so too often I think I'm in an interview, I came from that, it's more money, I'm looking for cash. It's like so many other things that are outside of that, because I think in my history, it's like I've never necessarily chased cash compensation. It was always an opportunity to learn, an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to get into a new type of experience. And above all, working with people that I was fired up to work with.
Yeah. The real interview, like we used to say to folks, the real interview is the first 90 days. Because we can all interview well and we can all do these things. And I was pretty far along in my career before I ever got a consciousness, before I ever had to take a personality profile or a communication profile. And I think for teams, my experience for teams under 50 or 25 folks, a lot of former colleagues, a lot of folks where there's just like, you have a lot of implicit, communication ease, right? And then you get bigger and it becomes hard to kind of replicate and maintain some of that as with success. Well, look, but we've touched on a lot of things here. And there's a theme that I feel like I'm hearing you saying around this idea of innovation networks, where, dealing with a lot of the bigger enterprises, the companies that they choose to work with, services side, product side, if that partnership exists, it becomes part of an extended innovation network. And the executives that can curate that well are creating a mutually beneficial financial relationship for each other. They're also giving each other, to your point, the insight and intel and access to experiment on both sides. And that's a phenomenal thing. And it's something almost a multiplier effect, right, on your team's resources to be able to leverage those partnerships. Mike, as we come to the end of the time here, I just kind of wonder, like, I often run into folks that are transitioning into one of these new roles and they're saying, hey, Pat, this could be the best or worst job I'm ever going to have. I'll let you know in 6 months. I'll let you know in a year based on what we did or, couldn't do. And I'm sure you're, again, seeing a lot of folks, similar situation. What advice do you have for folks if they're getting brought in and this is going to be them as the executive leader trying to build this? If there are 1 or 2 or 3 kernels of wisdom, what do you find yourself telling people?
Great question. I think, first of all, focus on the customer. And that could be I use that term very broadly, and whether it's an internal customer or an external customer. But I think there's so many subtle things that come out of customer conversations. And we talked a little bit about that during the kind of the highlights of kind of customer experience and kind of some of the digital transformation things, but really focus on the customer and everything. It helps you clarify strategy. It helps you clarify investment. It helps you clarify, roadmap. It helps you clarify financials. Everything starts with, that customer willing to separate their hard-earned money and give it to your company, right? Mm-hmm. And so whatever role you play within that organization, make sure you're doing it in the context of the customer. That would be number one. Number two, I would say, it's all about the experiences. And I think as you look at opportunities, don't necessarily always look for the highest cash compensation, but instead look for those things that are going to build your experience. And how does this fit in with the rest of the experience? And how are you going to grow from this experience compared to, the rest of your holistic, experiences together. So really that's two, is around experience. I think the third one I would say, and different people are different around how they handle this one, but I would say really go deep on your relationships. So I find that, the investment in time in relationship dramatically accelerates everything else in business. And that whether you call it kind of the speed of trust, but I think it's investing in the relationships so that you really get to the point where you can have honest, candid conversations about whatever it is. It makes all of the times when you have to have those hard conversations that much easier, because it's coming from a place of understanding and kind of a mutual value of that relationship.
Well, Mike, that's great advice. Focus on the customer, develop experiences, right, that accelerate your career, and everything is relationships. I think that's that's great advice for folks out there. The speed of trust is something that I put in a recent someone asked me, how fast can we move, right, with innovation? I'm like, well, first you're going to move at the speed of trust, because you get through that, it might take a year, but then you're going to do as much as you did in that year and a quarter. So Mike, thanks for the time today. I really appreciate it. I'd love to maybe check in with you guys as you get further down the road with SecureG, and we'll keep an eye on you as we move forward.
Thanks for your time. Appreciate it.
Great.